Hey guys, welcome back to my video series where I'm going through all the challenges in my book, The C Sharp Player's Guide, and solving them. Again, these are fairly raw; they're fairly random. You'll see all the mistakes I make, but I think that's still useful to see. I don't want it to look like this clean, perfect version because there's always that clutter and noise. I've shared that that warning before. I'll probably share it again, but anyway, this robotic interface. This builds on the last challenge, and if you watch the last video, I ended up going nuts on it and adding in all sorts of stuff. I backed off on that, so we should be building from what the last challenge actually expected, and we'll just go from here. The idea is that we used just a base class before, and instead of that, what if we use an interface? So not anything too big or weird or crazy. So we'll just work through this. I've moved that off the screen. You guys won't be able to see it, but you should have, your own book and should be able to see it. So all this wants is we want to change this thing. Instead of an abstract base class, we make an interface. So we remove the abstract, we change class to interface, and then interfaces usually start with an I. That is just convention. That's just how C# programmers do it. It took me a while to get used to that I. It's like the one and only place where C# will say you should stick a letter at the beginning of your thing. In fact, almost every other advice anywhere in the C# world is don't do it. But this is so common that it's like you don't like end your enumerations with blah 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 enum. You don't do that. People say, people get mad at you for doing that. But C# programmers stick an eye on it, and you don't need to. But it's one of those when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Like, give it a try. If you really, really hate it in a few months, you don't have to keep doing it unless you're on a team that dictates that you do it. So I recommend doing it. Like I said, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but you will get used to it, and you'll hate it less than you might at the beginning. And it's actually kind of nice to be able to know at any point in time, am I using an interface or am I not? And the name kind of just reveals it, which is kind of nice that it shows I'm depending on this abstract thing. It's not like a single specific type. It could be any of a number of things, and that's a useful hint. So I think there's plenty of value to it. Like I said, it almost, even if there weren't, it is the tradition among C# programmers. So I would say start with it at least, and if you don't like it, you don't need it. We don't need the public or the abstract on it. Interface members are assumed to be public and abstract. In fact, once upon a time, you weren't even allowed to put public and abstract on there. So you definitely don't need to put it on there, and most programmers won't, just because it's simple. And when it's defined as an interface, to just everything on here is part of the interface is fairly straightforward. By the way, that's different. It defaults to public, which is different than it is for a class. So keep that in mind. That's one of the reasons why within a class, I tend to prefer using explicit things. Like, this is the only time where I won't explicitly put public, and it's just because the rules about when and how things are public or private or internal or protected or whatever are not things they're just complicated enough that people don't always remember what the default is, and I'd rather just have it written out. Except for me, right here on an interface, I don't put public, and that might just be me being an old timer. Because interfaces didn't used to require you to put public or abstract, they didn't allow it. There was no choice. It had to be this way. So maybe I just got too used to it. But anyway, the only difference here now is to finish this up, really, is we've already removed the redundant public and abstract. That's the second bullet point. Obviously now we've renamed our thing, so these all should be iRobot command instead of robot command. And so I'm just going to go in and stick all of these in here instead. I maybe could have just renamed it in Visual Studio, and it's smart enough to There we go. Remove that breakpoint. I don't need it. The only other thing is because it's an interface, there's not like a thing we're overriding. So I don't need these override keywords. So I'm going to clean them up as well. And this needs to be an iRobot command as well. I think that'll do it. Everything looks like it compiles. So let's run that. This is now the second to last bullet point. On, north, east. That looks right to me. So I think that is it for this challenge, other than answer this question. Do you feel this is an improvement over using an abstract base class? Why or why not? So this is a matter of personal preference. Like there are times where you can use an interface and times where you can use an abstract base class. In this case, I think using the interface it removed a lot of kind of extra junk. Like we didn't need the abstract here, we didn't need the public abstract here, we didn't need the override here. Like it just simplified it. But let's talk briefly about like why you'd use an interface versus an abstract base class. Inheritance is a much stronger relationship than implementing an interface. When something is that base class, like it is locked to being that one specific thing. You can only have derived from one base class in C#. You can implement as many interfaces as you want. So that base class, like inheritance, is a very strong relationship. And so I only use that when the situation matches that. When the thing I'm doing is at its essence, in its core, it is this thing and it cannot be anything else, because that's just what it is. That's the time where I would maybe use a base class. And in places where it's just I just need this I just need anything that can do this capability, I'll use an interface for that. If it's just a set of capabilities that I want an object to have. An abstract base class allows you to put code down in the base class that can be used by all your derived things. Interfaces have a little bit of that, but it's a lot more limited. And so if you have a lot of people are like gravitate toward an abstract base class, and there's a lot of code that they want to share across them all. And I think that it's fine to have a bunch of code in the base class, but the one thing I would caution against is reusing a bunch of code is not a compelling reason to use inheritance. Just because you want to reuse some code doesn't mean you should derive from the thing that has that code. There are a lot of other ways that you can reuse code. For example, you could, whatever object has the code that you want, maybe what would have been a derived class from that could just know about an object that has that code. So it just has a reference to it. It's just, it has a, instead of an, so people call it, it's a has a relationship instead of an is a relationship. Just because something has code that you want doesn't mean you need to derive from that and call yourself the base class version. When you could just say, I know a guy who can do this. And if you can get away with it that way, you should. Like that's just because you want to reuse that code. Or you could maybe make like a static utilities class that just has some of these things that lots of other things want to use. And then you just call the static method or whatever it is. Like there's a lot of other approaches beyond inheritance to get code reuse. In fact, that is a poor excuse for using inheritance. Is I wanted to reuse the code, so I reuse the code. You should use inheritance if it's this like the essence of the thing is the base class, and you're just like fleshing out some of the details of it. This is non-negotiable. The base class is literally that. Let's talk about that in the context of commands. With the base class, the commands really can't be anything like if you with what we had before, where this was like the base class robot command base class. The south command could not be anything else. It is like just locked into always being a command. In this case, that's just fine. Like there's no limitations there. And I think in that sense, it could have been a very reasonable approach to say no, commands are commands, and that's all they are. What's the meme with the Incredibles, the dad, and I think that's Incredibles, the Incredibles 2. The dad's like, math is math, and anyway, I don't remember it, but that kind of thing where it's like if it is a command and that's all there is to it, like it's reasonable for these things to have been commands. So in this case, I think having these be a command base class was a very reasonable thing to do. We don't get a huge amount of benefits from having the interface, but in theory, this thing could mean if you did use an interface, a command, anything that implements that command interface could have also been it could have been essentially something totally different, while still being something that can run a command for a robot. So I don't know. Like I said, I don't think this robot command thing is kind of in the middle. It really could go either way. There's not a compelling reason to use the base class because it is just defining a single method. So we can just get it, and that's abstract. Doing an interface doesn't hurt us at all, and it cleans up the code, which is why I like it better. But there, you will definitely run into other scenarios where an interface or a base class, there's a much more compelling argument for it. And again, my guideline is if that is it at its essence, then you should be using a base class. If it's just a thing that it's capable of, you should be using make it an interface instead. Yeah, so I think that is about it for this challenge. Probably way more than necessary, but maybe it was useful extra information. And hey, this time it was about 12 minutes. So thanks for joining me, and I will see you guys next time.